A little over 8 years ago, I was working on a combined medical degree overseas. It was a program recognized in my home country, so it was a good move on paper. I was living on campus, and within the first month, I'd found a decent group of friends, most of them also studying medicine, except for one guy. That's Steve. Steve wasn't technically in our med program. He had barely scraped through a science undergrad, a 3-year degree, and somehow ended up in some of our shared classes. He sort of just inserted himself into our group. Like me, he lived on campus, and from day one, this guy just rubbed me the wrong way. Every interaction with Steve felt like some weird competition. He always tried to measure himself against me and another guy in the group, but I was the only one who constantly called him out or made sarcastic remarks, so I became his main target. To be fair, the guy really was an idiot. The only reason he stuck around our group was because he played therapist to the girls and tried to buy his way into their good graces, paying for their stuff, buying gifts, all that. As time went on, Steve's bitterness grew. He was barely passing and constantly complained that no girl would give him the time of day. His logic was that being so nice should automatically earn him a girlfriend, which honestly said a lot about him. After 3 years, he failed his final exams, meaning he had to repeat the year. Great. One more year with this guy just hovering around. By then, most of us had distanced ourselves from him. The girls had finally seen through his antics, and he was socially blacklisted. He sulked around campus, clearly miserable and spiraling into some internal meltdown over his academic and social failures. I, at that point, kept my distance from him, but his hatred for me only seemed to intensify. Around this time, I was dating someone. She was nice, sweet, and getting way too serious. She talked about the future, meeting her family, settling down. I had no intention of sticking around long term and was already planning to end it a couple of months in. But I didn't rush it. I wasn't emotionally invested enough to do so. Then I got sick, like really sick, and this is where things took a turn. While I was bedridden, Steve decided to report to the university that I had overdosed on hard drugs, and that sort of kicked off this chain reaction. Police were called, and I was dragged halfway across the city with a pounding headache and a fever, only to be locked up at the precinct. Their drug testing machine was down, so an officer made me stay the night in a holding cell, which I found out later was a completely illegal thing to do. I spent the night vomiting and dehydrated, stuck in this cold concrete box. The next day, the test was finally done. Clean, of course, and I was released. No money, no phone, no ID. I had to call my girlfriend from the station phone to come pick me up. A week later, I found out that Steve was the one who reported me. I didn't react immediately. Instead, I waited. For 6 months, I avoided Steve completely and watched him from a distance. I noted his routine. He'd come back from the nearby club every Friday night at around 2 a.m., usually stumbling drunk. My girlfriend visited regularly too, usually knocking on my door twice a week. I made sure to plan carefully, waiting until she came over on a Thursday so she wouldn't be around on Friday. When the night came, I locked my room door but left the window unlocked. My room was on the ground floor, and I could get in and out easily. Dressed up in all black, I waited on a bench along the path that Steve always walked. When he came staggering past me, I jumped him, and I beat the living crap out of him. No weapons, just fists. When he went limp, I laid him down on the bench and ran back to the dorms. I stashed the clothes under my cupboard and went to bed. After that, Steve disappeared for a few days. Then word got around that he'd been hospitalized. That fact surprised me. He hadn't seemed that badly hurt. But apparently after I left, someone else came across him. They took his wallet, his phone, his shoes, even his pants, and for whatever reason, they stabbed him in the leg. That part had nothing to do with me, but obviously, I panicked a little. If anyone had seen me that night, or if Steve had even guessed that I was involved, I could have been blamed for everything. At this point, I disposed of the clothes, just to be safe. But now here's where things really get interesting. A couple months go by. I was still in the clear, and Steve was still limping around campus, pissed off and desperate to figure out who had jumped him. Then one morning, my girlfriend knocked on my door and said that we needed to talk. I assumed that it was another conversation about our future, another attempt to get me to settle down. I was already planning on breaking up with her, so I figured now might be the right time. But that's not at all what she came to say. She told me that she had actually come to my dorm one Friday night 2 months ago. Yeah, that Friday night. She knocked, but I wasn't there. She waited, got worried, and thought about telling someone, but she didn't. She said she kept quiet because she loved me. She didn't want me to get into trouble, because it was obvious to me then that she knew what I was up to. She didn't bring it up until that morning, and let's just say, I suddenly had this whole new appreciation for her. I agreed to meet her family. I went to dinner, smiled, nodded, and played the role. I even stayed in that relationship for 2 more years, entirely to keep that secret buried. When my degree wrapped up, I hopped on the first flight back home. I know that my actions through all of this might paint me in a less than flattering light. I can accept that from others because I'm not seeking out the approval of strangers. I'm confessing this here because it's an interesting anecdote from my life, one I can't exactly share with friends and colleagues now, and one that I think back on every now and again and have anything from a chuckle to a deep pondering about my choices. Do I have some regrets about the way things played out? Perhaps. Steve got what he deserved, so he can get f***ed. But now that I'm older, I realize that simply ghosting my girlfriend to leave the country wasn't the right thing to do. But in my youth, I didn't really see any consequences to leaving in such a way. There's a little guilt, but I think everyone wound up better for it in the long run. I also think that the prevailing moral of this story is, don't be Steve. Don't get stabbed in the leg. Simple. When I was 15 years old, I almost did the unthinkable. I've never really talked about this out loud, and I rarely share it even in anonymous spaces. But tonight, I found myself scrolling through stories like this, and I figured maybe it's time to let mine out too. It's a lot to explain, and none of it's easy, but it's all real. I grew up with my mom. My dad wasn't around much after my parents split when I was young. From as early as I can remember, my mom had a pronounced drinking problem. Her childhood was rough, and she never really dealt with that pain, so it would come out when she was drunk. And when I say drunk, I don't mean she got sad or quiet. I mean that it was utter chaos in my house. About once a month, she'd come home late, already wasted. It was always the same pattern. She'd wake me up in the middle of the night, then start yelling, screaming, spitting in my face, hitting me. One minute, she'd be telling me that I was worthless. That's why my dad hated me. That my grandma hated me. Then seconds later, she'd be sobbing and saying that she loved me. It was this cycle of violence and confusion that lasted until sunrise, and it went on like that for years. Some of the worst memories come from when I was just 5 years old. One night, she made me stand facing the wall for hours while she screamed behind me. Every time I tried to sit or rest, she'd hit me. Sometimes she'd force me to do squats while pulling on my ears, making me look ridiculous. And she'd keep yelling until I collapsed from the pain, only to scream at me some more to keep going. She had this thing she used to do where she'd fake choke during her rants. She'd fall to the ground and lay there, totally still. I was 5 and I didn't know what to do. I'd panic, try everything I could to wake her up, and she wouldn't move. Then suddenly she'd snap back to life and start hitting me again, yelling at me for not helping her. Eventually, she stopped doing this once she realized that I stopped reacting to it. As I got older, the violence only got worse. I was used to the screaming, but when she started pulling knives during fights with her boyfriend, that's when I started to fear for my life. No one ever got stabbed, but I can still see her gripping that kitchen knife in my mind. Despite all of this, I never told a soul. I didn't even think to. This was just my life. It was my normal, and she made sure that I knew not to talk. If I ever brought up her behavior the next day, she'd either claim that she didn't remember, tell me that I was exaggerating, or flat out accuse me of lying. Sometimes she'd apologize, say that it would never happen again, but that only flew for a few times before I stopped believing her. School wasn't any better for me. I had zero social skills. I buried myself in video games. I was weird and often acted out, so I'd get bullied constantly. I never stood up for myself. Punishment was the only thing I knew, and I just expected it from everyone. We also moved around a lot. I believe I went to 10 different elementary schools in 4 different countries. Poland was especially rough. Not because of the country or the people. Polish people are actually really kind. But because we were living with a wealthy alcoholic my mom was dating at the time. They'd fight constantly, and luckily that episode didn't last long. Looking back, I think I started getting depressed around the age of 10. It wasn't something that I recognized at the time, but that heavy, hollow feeling was always there. And it only grew worse as the abuse continued. Then came my breaking point. I was 15. It was winter. I was getting ready for school one morning when she came home, still drunk from the night before. By this point, I'd stopped reacting to her, something that she didn't like. Her screaming just didn't get that same rise out of me anymore. I was taller, stronger, and emotionally shut down. I was numb, and she couldn't stand that. She started ranting, the same usual nonsense, and then she brought up my ex-girlfriend. That was the one thing that she knew would hurt me. The breakup had been recent, and it absolutely wrecked me. It was my first real relationship, and I was the one to blame for ruining it. Something inside of me snapped. Years of abuse, fear, and humiliation boiled over in that single moment. I lost control. It felt like I was watching myself from the outside. I screamed and lunged at her, grabbing her throat with both of my hands. I put everything I had into squeezing. I forced her back across the room onto the bed, and I just kept going. She didn't fight back. She just stared at me, and I realized for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my mother's eyes. The woman who terrified me for over a decade was now afraid of me. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been a few seconds, could have been 30. Time just didn't exist, and suddenly I came back to myself. I heard a voice in my head say, "Do you really want to do this?" And that's when I let go. Big mistake, because the moment that my hands were free from her neck, she attacked me. She grabbed a chair and started swinging at me with everything she had. I used my arms to block it, and that actually messed me up pretty badly. Then she bit me, hard, on that same arm. Eventually the swelling got so bad that it looked like I had a ping pong ball under my skin. I ran. All I wanted to do was get out of that apartment. I didn't have shoes or a jacket, just my pajamas. It was freezing outside. I was able to flag down a neighbor, and then I asked them to call the police. When the officers arrived, I told them all of what had happened, except the part about me trying to strangle her. They saw the bruises, the bite marks, and made the decision to take me into care. When they informed her, she tried to fake being the victim, said that I was making everything up. But halfway through this performance, she lost it and actually bit one of the officers. They tackled her, arrested her on the spot. She was released later that night, but she had to pay a huge fine for biting that cop. I was placed into government care, and honestly, it was better than anything I'd ever known. By the end of that year, I had my own apartment, rent-free, and received a small monthly stipend. I had access to social workers who actually cared. Props to the German CPS. They're the ones that actually gave me a chance. But the trauma of my early life caught up with me. I started drinking heavily. My depression deepened. Later that year, I tried to drown myself, and I knew that was my rock bottom. Since then, my life has been up and down. There are nights where I just don't want to be here anymore. Nights I fantasized about going back to my mom's house and getting some measure of revenge. Then nights where I felt absolutely nothing. But overall, I'd say things have improved. Slowly but surely. As I got older, I became more self-aware. I stopped being a target for bullies. I learned how to stand up for myself. I ended up quitting school, which wasn't exactly a proud moment. But I realized that I couldn't keep forcing myself to do something that made me miserable. I just stood up in class one day, said "F this," and never went back. I bounced between jobs for a while, never really finding my place, until I found music. That changed everything for me. Music gave me a purpose, expression, and a drive. I finally had something that I loved. Now I'm working full-time toward becoming a musician. I don't care if I fail anymore. Just trying makes me feel free. As for my mom, things got complicated. We've been slowly rebuilding our relationship. It was rocky at first. I made it clear just how much I hated her for everything that she put me through. But for the first time in my life, she actually owned up to it. She quit drinking, and she truly made an effort. I apologized for what I did that day, and she forgave me. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end. A couple years back, my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The weight of her past, the guilt, and the isolation is what I'm sure finally broke her. Watching her waste away physically and mentally was devastating. At one point, she was so thin that you could see the outline of her skull, yet she wore this strange, delusional smile. She's back in our home country now, staying with family. They're looking after her, and I'm grateful for that. The last 2 years have been hard. She knows that I still haven't fully forgiven her. She knows that I still carry that pain every day. I've told her that it'll take time. After all, it's only been 6 years since that fateful night. That's my story. A lot of bad things happened, but they've shaped me into who I am today. I've learned a lot about pain, survival, growth, and weirdly enough, I wouldn't trade that perspective for anything. People are shaped by what happens to them, but change is always possible. I don't hate my mother anymore. I just hope that she finds peace. Cruelty often comes from hurt, and sometimes the most broken people can change, if they really want to. Life's too short to stay miserable, so chase what makes you feel alive. After all, you've got nothing to lose. Growing up, I always had this gut feeling that my parents weren't going to make it. Forced separations throughout my childhood all but confirmed it. They were polar opposites from the start. My dad was focused, single-minded really, on building a business from nothing. He worked himself into the ground, physically and emotionally. At the time, it felt like he was just distant or cold. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I realized that his relentless hustle was his way of providing for us. That was his love language, building something that he could pass down. He had this hardened shell though, and his expectations were sky high, not just for himself, but for me and my mom too. That never worked well with my mom's nature. She was sensitive, deeply emotional. Where his world revolved around his business, hers revolved around me. I was the only child. She gave me everything. Every insight she had, every lesson, every ounce of care and attention. She was nurturing in all the ways that he couldn't be, but she needed something in return. Emotional support. A partner who could reciprocate love in a way that wasn't tied to work or sacrifice. And he just wasn't wired that way. The breaking point came the day after I graduated from high school. My mom just left. She packed up and walked out. And if I'm being honest, I couldn't blame her. Even as it all exploded around us, I understood. But that didn't make it any less chaotic. My dad, this rock of a man, broke right in front of me in ways that I didn't know were possible. He never heard from her again after that. She cut ties completely, clearly desperate to start a new life. Clean slate. College came and went in a way that it often does. Successes, mistakes, parties, breakdowns. The full spectrum of young adulthood. My dad still loved my mom. It never left him, and you could see it in everything that he did. It was honest, raw, and honestly heartbreaking. But it took losing her to show that kind of emotion. My mom, on the other hand, was done. She never talked about my dad, and I wasn't going to bring it up. Still, it was obvious that she made some poor choices in the years that followed. Bad relationships, questionable career moves, things that left marks that you can't undo. When my college graduation rolled around, I felt paralyzed. I couldn't imagine asking either of them to show up and be in the same space as each other. I didn't want to force them into that kind of discomfort, so I just didn't walk the stage. Everyone else did. My friends, my girlfriend, classmates. I watched from a distance and felt a hollow kind of ache that I just can't describe. That moment, which should have been full of pride, felt rather empty. Not long after that, things really unraveled. My mom's life had already been on a downward spiral, but after graduation, it nosedived. I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did on some level, but I didn't want to believe it. And that's when she took her life. She went all the way, and there's no sugarcoating it. I was 22, my mom was gone, and nothing really prepares you for that. After she passed, my dad became the father that I had always wished he'd been. It was like something unlocked in him. We talked about everything. We cried. We hugged. He told me things that he never had before, and for the first time, we were close. It was a strange kind of peace, one that came at an impossible cost. But just as we started healing, life had one more cruel twist for us. My dad had a routine surgery scheduled for a few months after my mom died. Nothing major, just a standard procedure. But he turned out to be the 1 in 2 million. He didn't make it out. Just like that, 22 with no parents. That kind of thing shapes you. It has to. But I'm still here. It's been 5 years since then, and I've grown stronger. Both my parents gave me what they could, each in their own way. I carry my mother's compassion and heart, but also my father's drive and resilience. Somehow, through all of this, I've never fallen into depression. Maybe it's perspective. People out there have been dealt worse hands than mine, and I'll always cherish the years that I got with them. But there's one thing that I can't let go of, and that's the part that eats at me. That graduation day, the one I chose not to walk, I took something from all 3 of us. It would have been the first time in 4 years that we would have been together, just for a couple of hours. That's all. And I took it away because I was afraid. Afraid of how they'd react. Afraid of the drama. Afraid of all the discomfort. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was really just trying to avoid feeling torn. I stripped away a moment that might have meant something, that might have offered closure, maybe healing, or maybe just one more shared memory together. I never apologized for that choice. It was selfish, and I know that now. That decision above everything else still weighs on me. It didn't help a thing. It didn't solve anything, and it can't be undone. Some actions are just plain permanent, and that one was mine. It's a regret that I'll likely hold for the rest of my life, and I don't know if there's anything that'll take that away. My wife and I had spent years trying to have children of our own, but eventually we learned that it wasn't going to happen for us biologically. After some time to process that, we turned to adoption, something that we had discussed many times before. We genuinely believed that every child deserves a loving home, and we were ready to provide one. That's when we met the boy who would become our son, Nate. His early life was rough, to say the least. His biological mother had struggled deeply with addiction and made choices that left her children in unsafe and unstable conditions. Nate's biological father wasn't in a position to raise him, but had the clarity to push for adoption. When Nate was around 6 years old, the state stepped in due to neglect and abuse, and his mother didn't contest his removal. We met Nate for the first time last year. I'll admit that I had my reservations. He was hyperactive, distracted, couldn't sit still at the restaurant where we first met, and avoided eye contact. ADHD crossed my mind, but still, he was 9. Kids get anxious and act out, especially in unfamiliar situations. My wife felt a connection with him almost immediately. I was still uncertain, but we kept seeing him, learning more and giving the idea a chance to grow. We took him to Chuck E. Cheese once, and he bounced off the walls the entire time. Once again, I chalked it up to being a kid. We started getting more details from his foster parents, who we didn't particularly like. They seemed disengaged and more interested in the paycheck than the well-being of the kids. But we pressed on. There were early signs he might be dealing with ADHD or perhaps something on the autism spectrum. My wife had experience with special needs kids and felt more confident than I did. Slowly, Nate began growing on us. He even started calling us Mom and Dad. Those little moments meant a lot. Later, closer to the date that we were scheduled to bring him home for a 6-month trial before the adoption was finalized, we started noticing some troubling patterns. He had an intense fixation on video games, and when we tried to place limits on screen time, he'd respond with aggression, throwing things, kicking furniture, screaming. We tried to handle it calmly and firmly, setting clear boundaries and explaining why. Eventually, we had to remove video games altogether. He was evaluated by several professionals, a therapist, psychologist, pediatrician, among others. One said ADHD, another said autism, another reactive attachment disorder. None of the diagnoses were encouraging, but by that point, we were already totally emotionally invested. We thought, we'll make it through. We love him, and love is enough. Or at least, we hoped it would be. That was about a year ago, and since then, things have only gotten harder. Almost daily, we've had to physically restrain him, under guidance and approval from therapists and DHS. We've tried reward systems, structure, kindness, patience, consequences, and tried to follow every piece of advice that was ever given to us. We've tried unconditional love, even when we felt like we were running on empty. But Nate lies constantly, even when there's no reason to. He acts out deliberately, breaks things, hurts the dog. He admitted to doing it because he wanted to see if it felt pain. He shows no remorse unless he's told to apologize, and even then, it's absolutely hollow. It's like he understands the rules but simply doesn't care. Tonight was another breaking point. My wife and I finally had a rare night out and dropped Nate off at a supervised parents' night out at the local YMCA. We had a lovely evening for the first time in what felt like months. But when we returned, the staff pulled me aside. Nate had been caught not once, but twice, groping young girls. I was stunned and ashamed. I took him to the car and had him explain to my wife what had happened. We spent hours trying to talk to him, explain why what he did was wrong, trying to get through to him. But again, no remorse, all excuses. After everything, after all the effort, the tears, the broken pieces of ourselves that we've poured into this, I regret adopting him. And I don't know if I could go through this again. If I had the chance to go back and choose differently, choose a different child or even none at all, I think we would have been happier. I think our lives would have been lighter. As painful as it is to admit, I wish we had never brought Nate into our lives. And though she hasn't said it outright, I think my wife feels the same way. I understand that much of Nate's behavior likely stems from the trauma that he endured, cycles of abuse that began long before we ever met him. Obviously, I don't blame him for what was done to him, but this life, this reality, it's not what I thought I was signing up for. I don't know how to help him, and I'm starting to fear that I may not be strong enough to keep trying.